Hello, welcome to the Awakening Report. I'm your host, Doug Hamp. Oh, it's so fun to be with you guys again. I love just going through the Bible and discussing different topics. Last week we had a fun debate with Dr. Randy White. That was fun. He was a good sport, and I think we had a good time discussing some of those finer theological details. Today we have Dr. Jonathan Sarfati, who he is with creation.com. And
Mhm.
he is going to enlighten us on some things from the book of Genesis. We will be talking about why the Bible is not a flat earth book. That'll be one of our topics. And we'll also get into other topics surrounding creation. He wrote an 800-page book on the first 11 chapters. And so I'm just looking forward to getting into all that he does. He's also a chess master, and he can play multiple people at the same time and sometimes even blindfolded. So
Yeah.
welcome, Dr. Sarfati. It's a
Well,
pleasure.
thank you for having me, sir, for this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure. You and I got to meet some years ago at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, California.
Hmm.
Really fun, and you brought some great information then, as I'm sure you will today. So just kind of give us just a brief sketch of of who you are, what you do, and how you got into creation.com.
Okay, you can probably tell I'm not from this country. Okay, I'm a dual national of New Zealand and Australia, so I come from the Southern Hemisphere. I now live in near Atlanta, Georgia. I've been here since 2010, and one reason is my wife is American, and we now have two little American granddaughters, so that's one major reason for moving here. Now, I have an earned PhD in physical chemistry from a secular university in New Zealand. I won the New Zealand Chess Championship once. And I've been working full-time for Creation Ministries for 21 years now. Most of them are in Brisbane, Australia, but for the last 7+ years near Atlanta. And so I've written quite a few books on the creation evolution issue. And the latest one is called the Genesis account. That's the 800-page commentary on Genesis 1 to 11. Why does Genesis matter? How do the doctrines of Christianity have their beginnings in the early chapters of Genesis? And how do the New Testament authors and Jesus himself interpret Genesis? And of course, the scientific evidence that supports it and refutes evolution and billions of years.
That's amazing stuff. As I was sharing before the show, I wrote a book some years ago called The First 6 Days, and in there I argued that the Bible, at least, very much talks about a literal 6-day creation. I've stumbled upon something from Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh,
He was he was talking about. Let's see if I can remember. Oh goodness, no, my mind is escaping. Don't you hate that? But essentially, oh, okay, I remember. He was talking about inflation and
oh yeah.
how inflation at that, assuming that let's take their model for a moment of the Big Bang, that at those earliest moments of inflation of the Big Bang, then you would have had a faster than the speed of light inflation of the universe.
That's what they say. Yeah.
And well, it really, it kind of, I'd love to just kind of pick your brain. You can, tell me if I'm on the right track or not. But to me, it seems like, if we assume that that model is at least partly true for the moment, um, is it possible that because of inflation, because it can happen faster than the speed of light, and he likened it to a loaf of raisin bread, where the raisins are the galaxies, and you can only travel through the bread at the speed of light, but the bread itself is expanding faster than the speed of light. Could that in some way help us to synchronize the Big Bang perspective with the Bible? Do you see any correlation?
I don't see the thing is the inflation theory was made to get around certain problems in the Big Bang, like for instance the uniformity of temperature right around the cosmic background radiation. So something is 10 billion light years north and 10 billion light years south. They're almost the same temperature in the background, and yet they've never been in contact. You see, the speed of light doesn't go fast enough to transfer energy from hot things to cold things. That's called the horizon problem. You can't see past the horizon. Okay, so that is the Big Banger's own distant starlight problem, which I love to throw at creationists, but in fact they've got a huge distant starlight problem of their own, the horizon problem. And the thing is, they have to resort to faster than light expansion of space to get around this. Others have decided that speed of light was much faster in the past. You see, you can't escape the fact that the speed of light is being exceeded somehow. So they can't point the finger at creationists for talking about these sort of things, like when God stretched out the rakia, the expanse, on day 2. I would say, well, God is not limited by speed of light. He's a creator of time, creator of space, and therefore this speed is distance over time. So he's not limited by speed. So God was the one who stretched it out.
Okay.
Evolutionists don't know what stretched it out. They can't tell you why it started, why it stopped, how did you reverse gravity to make it happen. They talk about the inflaton field, but the inflaton field is whatever made inflation happen. That's all. So it's an ad hoc thing to solve their own distant starlight problem.
I see. Okay. So they have data. They don't know how to resolve all this data, so they come up with the theory of inflation to kind of put a Band-Aid on it for now and say, well, that's inflation.
Yeah.
I just have a feeling that, they've discovered some key things, as far as data points. I think their data points are quite often very valid. But I think the story that they put around it, because of course they cannot invoke God, so they have to do it all completely natural. One thing that really blew my mind is they also believe that space itself is expanding, which
Yes.
for the inflation. But then, of course, it begs the question: expanding into what? Okay, so
well, there is no what to expand under the Big Bang theory. The space itself is expanding. There's no what, because if there's a what, there's actually space outside. But the fact is, they believe space itself is expanding, and time itself began with the Big Bang. And that's not a problem for Christians, because we believe God created space and time, and therefore he's, again, not limited by either. Now, of course, I don't believe the Big Bang, but I'm saying that space expanding is quite okay, I think.
yeah, and I think that's something for people who are into the Bible. Sometimes we can have this black or white idea that all science, all evolutionary type of science or Big Bang type of sciences, it's either all right or all wrong. And yet, I think that they get some of their points right, but then their meta story is sometimes got some holes in it. So,
well, yes, because Genesis is a book about history more than science. So in fact, the difference between creation and evolution is a view about history. You see, the science in the present, the operational science that makes inventions and cures diseases, that is operational science. But the difference really is about historical science. How did these things come to be?
okay.
In fact, we don't dispute any of the operational science. We agree with operational science. Creationists founded operational science.
So again, operational science is the science of making things work, of making computers, basically technology. It has an application,
but also how things work. I mean, making things, but also how things work at the fundamental level. You see, and things you can do a test and repeat as well. But history is one off, so it's a totally different type of thing. And leading evolutionists have actually admitted that that evolution is quite different from things like physics and chemistry, where you do experiments and try to work out natural laws behind it. Evolution is a historical thing, and creation is a historical thing as well.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, on this topic, obviously you've seen that there's this huge resurgence of flat Earth, very surprisingly. And it's all about this thing right here. In fact, I get so many comments. They're like, "Doug, take that thing down." I'm like, "No, I'm going to keep it because
please keep it."
I believe that the Earth is round, and the Scripture teaches that as well. I've done a number of studies on that, but of course, I want to hear really your perspective. You've again written an 800-page commentary on Genesis 1 to 11. Yeah. You must have thought through this. Okay, so one of the arguments is that the word that you mentioned, rakia, that is referring to the dome that is over the earth. And of course, as we know, Dr. Michael Heiser, nice guy, but he's purporting, though he doesn't believe in a flat earth, but he has suggested that the ancient view or the ancient cosmology was that you had basically an earth that was the shape of a plate, and then they had a kind of a dome, kind of like the butlers bring out when you take off the silver lid, and that's essentially the ancient cosmology. But is that true? I mean, is that really what people were thinking?
Well, you
Does
got
the Bible really suggest-
Noel Weeks is an Australian. He's an expert. He teaches ancient history at a secular university, and he wrote quite a detailed article, paper in the Westminster Theological Journal not that long ago, where he addresses. I mean, I think a lot of people like Heiser and Walton have misunderstood what the ancient Near Eastern literate people were actually thinking. They read cosmological statements which weren't actually intending to teach cosmology, but probably more everyday language. And then the assumption is that Bible authors couldn't have been any smarter than their surrounding pagan nations. Of course, if God is inspiring the book in the first place, well, why shouldn't they be? So a lot of assumptions go around. And in fact, it's sad to see that these 19th century atheist arguments are being parroted by people supposedly in the evangelical community, and sadly to discredit the Bible as an authoritative source on history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, that's the biggest problem here. I mean, if people want to believe flat Earth, I guess they have the right to do that. But please don't bring the Bible into this thing. That's what really offends me. I remember when I was in Israel studying at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, there was this, just as you said, there was this bias that, the biblical authors were borrowing everything. That was the big word, is that they were always borrowing. And I thought, well, wait a second, can't the Hebrews have their own ideas once in a while? But it's almost like, no, they cannot have their own ideas. They were always borrowing from the Babylonians. They were borrowing from the Akkadians or from the Sumerians. They never had an original idea.
And then, of course, that's where Noel Weeks comes in as a scholar of the ancient Near Eastern history and literature, and a lot of these guys have misunderstood what these other guys believed, you see. And yet, so that the whole house of cards is based on a faulty view of ancient Near Eastern beliefs.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into some particulars then. So we have the Egyptian cosmology. Okay, you have Geb, who's the god of the earth. He's lying down. You have Nut, who is his wife, and she's kind of doing the bridge over him, as it were, and so she becomes the dome of heaven. All right, and then speckled on her body are all these stars.
Mm-hmm.
What were, in your opinion, what were your research, what were the Egyptians really thinking about that? I mean,
I don't know if you can even read. I mean, do they really think there's a big giant woman up above us? I mean, no. What is it? Is it a giant woman above us, or is it a dome above us? I mean, you can't have it both ways, which means I think they're misreading what the ancient Egyptians are really believing.
Okay. So do you think the ancient Egyptians may have understood? Or do they not even care about really the shape of it?
Actually, a lot of people, I don't think, even cared about the issue as much. I think when you get into the Greeks, you've got the ancient Greeks actually caring about these things. And Pythagoras noticing that the shadow of the moon on the lunar eclipse is always round. You see, it's never any other shape. So what produces a round shadow from any direction? Well, the Earth has to be a ball to do that.
All right, say that again, because I think that is huge. In fact, that is one of the, I think, the simplest proofs that we have that yes, the Earth has to be a sphere, because you take this thing here, and what you just said, when you shine a light at it from any direction, it will always cast a round shadow.
Yes, and that's what ancient Greeks knew, and no one in the church ever disputed. You got a lot of myths going around everyone at school has been told, well, Columbus sailed around the earth, but everyone laughed at him because the church believed the earth was flat, he'd fall off the edge. Well, no, there was never any such dispute, because no one in the church had any other view. They all believed the earth was a sphere. I mean, almost without exception. You could count on one hand people who believed in a flat earth, and they were basically ignored. When you go to people like Thomas Aquinas, he writes Summa Theologiae, the leading textbook of theology in the Middle Ages, and he talks about proof. And let's think of something which is so obvious to everyone. How do you prove this? And he picked the roundness of the earth as something obvious and well known to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And this is 200 years before Columbus.
Okay.
So then in the 19th century, you have people trying to invent this myth that the church believed in a flat earth. You have Washington Irving making the total fable of Columbus, and the humanists latching on to that to discredit the church so you'd new to them when it came to debating Darwinism. And that's what I think Michael Heiser is trying to do, is neuter the young earth creationists by saying the Bible's a flat earth book. You can't trust it on biblical history either. And I think it's the same error made by the 19th century atheists like John Draper, Andrew Dixon White, writing big tomes about the warfare between science and Christendom, which is a complete pack of lies. And I don't think you'll find any historian today who believes any of that stuff.
Okay. So what does any of this really matter? I mean, obviously you and I don't believe that the Earth is flat, but does it matter about that? Does it matter about the age of the Earth? I mean, does it really matter about these origins? Can't we just kind of leave that stuff aside? Maybe did you waste, all your time reading 800 pages about, those early chapters when we should just focus on the love of Jesus and the cross?
Okay, but the thing is, what does that mean? Jesus believed in a young earth. He went to Adam and Eve to teach about marriage as one man and one woman. Surely that's not a side issue. It's under attack in the Western world, marriage as a man and a woman. And yet Jesus said from the beginning of creation, they were made male and female. This is in Mark chapter 6. It's from the beginning of creation, not millions of years after the beginning. And love of Jesus, who is he? He's the one who came to die for our sins. Then go to 1 Corinthians 15. Why did Jesus come to die? He explains, because the first man, he calls Adam the first man, committed a sin and brought physical death into the world. And that's why Jesus, the last Adam, died for our sin, because death is a punishment for sin, and then he rose physically from the dead. So physical death by Adam, so physical death by Jesus, then the physical resurrection as the first fruits, you see. So if you haven't got the first Adam bringing death, why do we even bother with the last Adam?
Okay.
And the thing is, millions of years, you can't escape the fact that millions of years means you have death of humans and animals before Adam's sin. So that undermines the whole basis of the gospel that Paul preaches. I mean, 1 Corinthians 15 is a vital chapter on the gospel and the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it goes back to in fact, it quotes the first 3 chapters of Genesis. Paul either quotes or alludes to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if Genesis, the entire book of Genesis is not real history, then that cannot be a support basis for really, I mean, it kind of supports the entire Bible, because as you said, Jesus and Paul and a number of others are going back, assuming that these are real people. Jesus ought to know, I suppose, right? He was there.
Yeah, he was there. Yep.
Right, so either, because if he was saying, well, yeah, Adam and Eve got into all this mess, and of course you have marriage back with then, if that wasn't real, then, and of course if Jesus is God, which I believe he is, then that would make him a liar. He's kind of inventing this story. So it's a credibility issue. Is that what we're getting at?
Well, because we're supposed to follow Jesus, yet Jesus believed ridiculous things like the world's very young, and there was such a person as Adam and Eve, and there was a real flood, and a real Noah, and a real ark, and these things we know can't be true. Well, why should we trust Jesus who believed those things were true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the thing is, the other excuse I've heard is that Jesus was accommodating to his listeners' faulty views. But since when did Jesus ever accommodate? No one would have crucified an accommodating Jesus. Wouldn't have bothered.
That's a good point. Yeah. You Pharisees, you think what you want. That's fine. It's okay. I don't, No, he was challenging them, wasn't he? In fact, he was slapping them in the face, figuratively speaking, on many occasions.
He rebuked them for not believing Scripture enough.
Mm-hmm.
Not believing it too much, but not believing enough. He said to the Sadducees, have you not read what was spoken to you by God?
Yep.
So he never corrected their understanding of Scripture. Only if they didn't live up to Scripture is when he rebuked them.
Yeah, well said. Now, just kind of on the old Earth versus young Earth perspective, just to kind of clarify for some of our audience, is it possible to be a Christian and believe in an old Earth?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And in fact, it's possible to believe in evolution and be a Christian. The founding chairman of our board, John Rendell Short, he was a saved theistic evolutionist for many decades, but eventually he realized, hang on, evolution says there was death and suffering before sin. You've got this big contradiction there. So he had to think, what am I going to do about this? And he decided he'd repent of evolution and just follow what the Bible said. Even if he could understand it, didn't know all the answers, he was going to say, well, the Bible says this, I can't believe evolution anymore. Now, a lot of people haven't made that connection there. So they're saved, but they've got a terribly inconsistent faith. And of course, Jesus is the Logos, John 1:1. Okay, therefore we should be logical in our faith, but being illogical is not the unforgivable sin.
Okay, I like that. I would agree with you that we can have. I mean, and probably all of us have some aberrant view somewhere, right? I mean, nobody's 100% perfect in their theology. So I think God is maybe accommodating in that sense that yes, we are in error quite often. But wherever possible, let's try to get rid of the error because it just makes everything a lot smoother.
Truth will set you free, right? Not the error.
Exactly. Truth is what we're striving for. So okay. So we have this group of people who have come into this idea that the Earth is actually flat, and they're arguing that the Bible teaches us that the Earth is flat. So I want to do two things. I want to get into the biblical text, and I'd also like to talk about the scientific evidence. Okay, so let's start with the Bible because that's really the big foundation for a lot of people. They think no, the Bible teaches it, and I'm going to go with Jesus. I'm not going to believe this satanic lie, and NASA's wrong, and it's all just a satanic plot. And they believe that evolution, as you and I do, also think that evolution is much a distraction by the devil, but they would suggest that evolution and the spherical shape of the Earth are both lies from the devil. Okay. So, what are your thoughts?
Okay, historical thing. Okay, if the Bible really teaches the flat Earth, how come almost no one in the church believed it? Okay, surely there are always devout people in the church, and the early church fathers, and the devout medieval scholars, and the reformers. They never saw the flat Earth in the Bible. Okay, so how come in recent years people claim the Bible teaches the flat Earth when no one had ever seen it throughout church history? Now, since we're talking about Jesus, he talked about his second coming. I think it's talking about where he says there'll be a tomb there, two people in bed, and one's taken, one's left. But then he also says there are two women grinding corn, one taken, one left. And then two people in the field, one taken, one left. Now, these are all an instant of time, and yet you have clearly one that is night, you have morning, you have late afternoon at the same instant. And this is surely only possible on a spherical Earth. On a flat Earth, you'd expect to find everywhere lit up or everywhere at night. Now, I've actually talked to my parents on Skype, okay, or on these sorts of things, and even with my grandchildren with me, so they could talk to my parents. And of course, it's darkness, it's dark here, and they could see it's light where my parents are. Okay, so that's a clear evidence from Jesus and from science that we have to be living on a ball and not on a flat disk. Now, they're trying to now claim that the sun circles a flat disk overhead that's quite close to us, 3,000 miles away from us. It's circling overhead. But if it was doing that and it was close, it would appear to change size. It would start small, get very large at noon, and they get smaller and smaller, but we don't see that happening. So you can use your eyes. You can see the sun actually looks like it's disappearing piecemeal over the horizon. If anything, it looks bigger near the horizon than at noon. But according to their idea, it should be disappearing, getting further and further away, getting smaller and smaller. It doesn't look like that. This is something you can do with your own eyes.
Right.
You can Skype someone or Google Hangout with someone in a different time zone. You'll see I'm talking the truth. You don't need NASA. It's nothing to do with NASA lies. It's something you can see with your own eyes.
One of the questions in the chat room right now, people are saying, well, God clearly says that he made the sun and the moon to be a light by day and a light for night, thereby implying, they're inferring, I should say, that text is saying that the sun is its own light and then the moon is its own light, right? So
but is it really saying that? I mean, because as far as we see, the moon is reflecting light, but it's still light for us. I mean, people talk about moonlight today, the Moonlight Sonata. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, Debussy, the light of the moon, the clair de lune is the light of the moon. We talk about that because the moon really is reflecting sunlight. So as far as we're concerned, it is the lesser light. Now, it's actually, even in the Middle Ages, all clergymen studied theology at the university had to take an astronomy course. And that astronomy textbook was written by Johannes de Sacrobosco, and he gave proofs that the Earth was a globe, and he gave proof that the moon was reflecting sunlight. Okay, so these are things that were taught in the Middle Ages.
Okay, long before NASA.
Yeah.
Right.
So nothing to do with NASA. Everyone knows. In fact, you can tell the moon's not shining its own light because there are certain shadows that are clearly illuminated from above and not from below. So the moon's it's clearly being lit by something. And hang on, how could the sun avoid lighting the moon? It's such a bright object. How could it not light the moon?
Right. Again, I'm just looking at the questions in the chat room here. Neil says 1 Corinthians 15:41 says there is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars. For one star differeth from another star in glory.
Correct.
So it says that the moon has its own glory. That's something he's looking at.
But doesn't mean that it's emitting. In fact, if you want to be really pedantic, you say even in the emission, you absorb energy and then excite the electrons, and it comes down on electron level and emits light. So even the sun's light comes from basically excitation of electrons. In the moon's case, you have excitation of electrons by the sunlight. It excites electrons and then it scatters it off at the same frequency. So the distinction between your own light and reflected light is actually what defines your own light, if you want to argue that way. And by the way, that passage he quoted is the example of Paul alluding to Genesis 1. He's actually mentioning the same things that God mentions as he created in day 4 of creation week, the sun, moon, and stars. You see, in that little passage there, he's actually expecting his readers to be aware of Genesis 1. Again, not all flesh is the same, he talks about.
Right.
So that's Genesis 1. He talks about days 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Okay.
That particular parts, you see, of creation week.
Okay, I think it's a great point because the text does not specifically say, this each of these lights has its own energy source. It has its own fuel source. It doesn't say that. I mean, God doesn't specify right down to, what is happening there, whether it's nuclear fusion or fission or whatever's happening. He doesn't say, there's a bunch of hydrogen up there. I mean, he just says that, look, the sun is to give light by day and the moon is to give light by night. And then of course, Paul says that they both have their own glory, and yet the moon does have its own glory.
Yeah.
So, for those of you guys who are in the chat room, thank you for the questions. But I think we're trying to, or you guys are trying to see something that's just not there.
No.
One of the objections is, well, the Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh, will bring you into correct understanding. But I mean, the Ruach HaKodesh wrote the Bible, right? I mean, that's what we need to understand is that this is God's book, and he doesn't say that, no, each has its own particular light source.
No.
But,
if someone, look, with all due respect, if you start saying the Holy Spirit has to enlighten you, you're sort of, it's not a very honest sort of argument. You're saying, if you don't agree with me, the Holy Spirit's not in you. How about arguing from the text of Scripture? Show us from what the Holy Spirit's revealed. The Scripture, we can both see that. We can both look at the original languages. We both have the lexicons, the commentaries. So how about you prove from something that both of us can look at? Some supposed divine revelations only hit you and not any of us. You look, be fair, and go to evidence that all of us can check. Test everything it tells us in the Bible, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Test everything. Well, let's kind of segue into the word rakia.
Yes.
That's a major point here in this whole debate. What is the word rakia according to your research?
Well, it means that something which is stretched out. The emphasis is not on the material being stretched, but the actual act of stretching. So it means the stretched out expanse of space. And then you have things like the sun and moon were placed in the rakia. The rakia is also called the heavens, you see. So it's clearly the expanse of the heavens is what we're talking about, not some sort of dome. There's nothing to do with the material. It's to do with the stretching. And that is where I think that God stretched out the heavens faster than light. And that's on mostly on day 2. It may have continued as far as day 4 when you got the heavenly bodies being created, but certainly day 2 is where you had the explicit rakia being made and expanded.
I think part of the problem is that the word is translated into the King James as firmament, coming from the
Yes.
Latin firmamentum.
Yes.
What do you make of that translation?
Well, it's a bit unfortunate. And that goes back to the Septuagint, which has stereoma, which again, the Greek the translators, the Hebrew translators into Greek, they went by the Greek ideas that you have the Earth as a little sphere, and you got a sequence of concentric crystalline spheres in which the planets and the stars move. You see, so you got this idea of a crystalline sphere, and the translators are referring to this crystalline sphere. Josephus had the word crystallos, again referring to this. So that's the Greeks. They were influenced by Greek cosmology, and firmamentum basically continues this idea of a firm space, which came from the Greek cosmology of the day, not from the actual Hebrew meaning of the day. I mean, of course, the King James relied quite a lot on the Latin Vulgate, hence firmamentum is in the King James. But the more modern evangelical good translations have expanse.
Okay, yeah. In fact, we find that word in the book of Isaiah, where it talks about stretching out the heavens like a tent, and the word rakah is actually being used there to describe something of a stretching motion.
Right. And so the action that's being emphasized. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and of course, when you stretch something out, just like when you stretch out a balloon, there obviously develops an expanse. And that's, what we're all living inside of is we're living in this expanse. It just doesn't, it doesn't stop at 3,000 miles up. It goes out, some 15 billion light years, and so it's obviously a very, very, very big thing. I mean, maybe, at the edge of the horizon that we can see, billions of light years away. Who knows what's beyond that? I mean, that's an interesting question.
Well, it's interesting that the right throughout church history, we knew the Earth was a tiny speck compared to the vastness of space. This is not some new discovery. You have John Sacrobosco again saying that, Boethius saying things like that compared to the expanse of the distance of the fixed stars, the Earth is just a little point.
Wow.
No size at all. So this has been known right throughout the church history that the Earth is tiny compared to space.
In fact,
more figures on
things you can do just with your own eyes. You can look up into the heavens and you can deduce a great amount just by looking up there with some careful observation, which we don't do nowadays because we're all indoors. But back in the day, people would be outside. It was dark. You looked up a lot more.
And they actually did very ingenious deductions on things, so they were not silly. I mean, to do things without telescopes, they did amazing things without telescopes. And now, of course, we've got telescopes which can do even more and discover things they had no idea about. But they definitely knew the Earth was a tiny little speck compared to how big the whole thing was.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so all right, so there, the word rakia, it means expanse. That is very well agreed upon.
Yeah,
firmament is an unfortunate translation. It creates some confusion in our minds. So okay, we've kind of nailed that one. What about the pillars of the earth? You get this idea that
I think pillars of the earth. You think of, Paul talks about, was it James and John and Peter? These are the pillars of the church. So sometimes the pillar is used of a notable person who's a foundation of something. The pillars of the church were not literal wooden or concrete pillars. They were actually people who were basically supporting the whole structure. And that's what I think the pillars of the earth are talking about. And notice all these passages are in the Psalms, which is a poetic book. So you expect a bit of poetic license in the way it talks about. We don't expect to take everything literally in the Psalms. And it was never intended to be taken literally either.
Okay. And I think it's interesting just looking at geology. We can actually look down into the mantle of the earth, and we actually do see sometimes when there's an earthquake or something, we can actually look down into the grand crevice that's created there, and you can see what things that sometimes occasionally look like pillars. So I think there may be, it could be figurative language occasionally in the Psalms, but there could also be something that there's actually some stuff down there, but it doesn't mean that these are just kind of hovering out where would these be hovering? I don't know, according to the flat Earth model, where they're
look at the flat Earth discs they have. I don't see any pillars on these flat Earth models that I see. I mean, also, what about if they want to be literal, the four corners of the Earth, which of course you and I know it's the four compass points of the Earth. But hang on, four corners of the Earth, is it not rectangular then?
Right.
Why is it a disc if it's got four corners? Okay, see, it seems that they are cherry picking things in the Bible and ignoring. Okay, pillars of the earth. Where are your pillars then? Where do you think they are? Are we on a turtle, on an elephant, or whatever? I'm not sure. I think they are.
I think they're not sure either. Well, okay, let's take maybe one more perspective of, you touched on the four corners of the earth there, which is really the four quadrants, or the four, because you can actually have corners on a globe. Is that right?
Well, I mean, I think it's the four directional points, east, west, north, south.
Right, but if let's say that you meet at the North Pole, you could actually draw four corners if you're standing on the North Pole, or really for that matter, anywhere on the globe, right? In fact, we do it all the time, don't we? We have cities, we have streets, and they're
mountain maps. Yeah, sure. I mean, some cities are laid out on grids, aren't they?
Right. So you have corners. That's not a problem. But you can go in any direction from those four corners. So, in fact, here in Colorado, you can travel down to New Mexico area, and you got the four corners where you can be in four different states at the same time. So it very much is possible to have four corners on a globe. I mean, that's not at all impossible. So, well, what about the text where in Isaiah he says that God sits above the circle of the earth there? The word there is.
We go think of Neil, John Glenn, he orbiting the Earth and all that. No matter what direction he looked at, the Earth appeared like a gigantic disc to him from any direction, which of course points to a spherical Earth, because only a sphere looks like a circle from any direction. So I think that's what we're talking about here. I mean, and also the word chug can mean things like a sphere. So you can think about it that way. I mean, there's another word, the skeptics, or the word door, but the thing is, that is not unambiguously a spherical thing either, because you talk about Isaiah again talks about these armies forming a door around a city, and I'm pretty sure they weren't forming a dome around the city. These armies didn't have levitation or anything. It had to be a ring around the city. So again, their favorite word for ball doesn't always mean that. I think it's just a general word for roundness. And the same with chug, the circle of the earth, the chug of the earth. It seems to be, again, a word for roundness. And it's interesting, other languages, there's a Kugel for ball in German. Kugelschreiber means ballpoint pen.
Okay.
Yes, wow. So I'm not sure there's a linguistic connection there, but I mean, possible.
That's very interesting. I actually made the argument in one of my videos that chug, because it's obviously related to the word Chagag, which is for like Chag Sameach. In fact, Chag Sameach, Happy Hanukkah.
Yes.
So
yes,
it's the last night of Hanukkah here. But so one option I thought is that you could actually have the orbit of the Earth around the sun, because there it is doing what you do in a Chag, or a chug, or a chagag, whatever variation of that route you want to pick there. But it basically means to go on a pilgrimage, which means you go on a circuit. Okay.
It's a circuit, yeah.
And so, it could be that we're not just looking at just the Earth. I mean, God may be looking at more than just the Earth, but looking at the orbit of the Earth around the sun. Right?
It's a
possibility.
I mean, it's the sort of thing. I mean, when they look at the supposed flat Earth verses they bring up, tend to point to more of at least either ambiguous or even leaning more towards the roundness of the Earth, doesn't it? In fact, everyone that you find, it's either ambiguous or spherical.
Well, let's change gears a little bit here. Let's talk about some of the science. Let's imagine if the Earth were really flat. What would that do to gravity? What would that do to the heat from the light of the sun? And just all these different things that, if we really were to dive into this model, what would the Earth really
that depends on who you're talking to. Some flat earthers pretend gravity doesn't exist. Okay, it's totally bizarre. It's almost like they had to invent one thing after the other to prop up their ad hoc view. It really becomes almost impossible to talk to them sometimes.
But the word gravity just came from gravitas, which means heavy. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I think it sounds about right. But gravity is one of the best attested principles of operational science, discovered by a Bible-believing Christian, Isaac Newton. Okay, so why should a Christian reject gravity? It doesn't make any sense to do so. But I mean, the thing is, okay, how we know the sun is extremely far away is that you can measure the shadows, for instance, and it's only possible the sun keeps the same sort of size throughout the day because it's so much further away compared to the Earth's radius. The Earth's radius is a tiny fraction of the Earth-Sun distance, so the sun doesn't appear to change size in the sky. Mm-hmm. It can't be close to us, otherwise the sun's apparent size would change drastically. Okay, it's one thing. And I come from the southern hemisphere. We see different stars there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you see the Southern Cross there, for example. Is that right?
The Southern Cross is one of the main. It's on our flag. The New Zealand and Australian flag have the Southern Cross. So are all New Zealanders and Australians lying when we say there's a different constellation up there that you can't see from here?
I've been to South America and I saw the Southern Cross, and I'm like, I've never seen that in the Northern Hemisphere. So obviously something is different here.
And the thing is, I mean, everyone in the Southern Hemisphere can see the Southern Cross, okay? And that's not possible on the flat Earth, because surely if we're on a disk, well, why do all the Southern Hemisphere people see the same set of constellations, sometimes at the same time, like South Africa and South America, 5 hours apart, they're both at night and they're both looking at the Southern Cross. Mm-hmm. And yet on the flat Earth disk, they're 90 degrees apart on the disk. It doesn't, sorry. And also, have you ever seen a slow motion of the stars? Even picture that, how the stars appear to be rotating counterclockwise or revolving counterclockwise around the North Pole, the Pole Star. Well, in Australia, it's clockwise. Okay. Yeah, again, it's because we're on a rotating ball, and the Australians are on the other side.
So that point right there would absolutely disprove the whole flat Earth, argument, because in the Northern Hemisphere, it's going counterclockwise. In the Southern Hemisphere, it's going clockwise. Yeah. And unless all of you Kiwis are just a bunch of liars, which I don't think you are,
probably not.
Then, probably not. I mean, then we have to somehow reconcile that. But if it were a flat Earth, then it should all be going the same direction. That's the point, right?
And the thing is also, every time, what phase of the moon it is. You could ask someone in Australia what phase they're seeing in the moon. We all see the same phase, because again, the Earth-Moon distance is so much bigger than the diameter of the Earth that all of us are seeing the same phase of the moon. But again, if the moon is either orbiting the Earth or is revolving around the head, then different people on the disk are going to see a different face of the moon. Yet we all see it all looks alike, no matter where we are. I mean, there's a great supermoon a few weeks ago, right? It wasn't a few days ago, probably a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I saw it. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, but the thing is, Australians saw the supermoon too. Okay. On the same night. Mm-hmm. New Zealanders, the English, everyone could see it, you see, and that's only possible because we're all on a rotating globe, and the globe rotates, so we can all get a chance to see that thing. No matter where we are, okay? Yeah. And things like hurricanes, you see, you got hurricanes, again, they revolve anti-clockwise up here, but again, the Australian cyclones revolve clockwise. Okay, so it's a very clear distinction. It makes everything you see makes perfect sense of a global Earth, and absolutely no sense on a flat Earth.
And even your toilets flush the opposite direction.
That's a myth, actually. Sorry, yeah. The Coriolis effect that requires fairly large distances, otherwise it's swamped by the irregularities in the toilet bowl. I even talk about that in my commentary, actually. The only commentary that talks about the Coriolis effect in toilet flushing. Yeah.
Funny. Okay. Yeah. So that's a myth. They all go to the same direction. Is that right? Based on the toilet. Okay. I get it.
Difference. Okay.
That's good to know. That's good to know. I've been wondering about that one. So
it is a myth.
That's funny. Wow. So what do you make of all this this flat Earth stuff? I mean, where do you suppose it came from? What's their agenda that you can see?
I just don't know, because about 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote an article called "The Myth of the Flat Earth," which disproves the idea that Columbus was battling flat Earthers, and I got very good responses. And that's only 4 years ago. But in the last year or two, we get quite nasty responses when we write about the flat Earth. And so therefore, this whole thing is a very recent phenomenon. I wonder if, first of all, it was atheists trying to discredit the Bible and discredit Christians, and some Christians didn't see the joke and actually have gone on board with this and are being misled by it. I think atheists started it, but Christians are unfortunately falling for this nonsense. Even a Flat Earth conference, I mean, a month or so ago, wasn't there?
In North Carolina. Yes, they sure did. They had a great turnout too. They had, I guess, 500 people in attendance. So this is obviously growing, not going away.
And they were Christians, and for some of them were actually quite annoyed at people referring to the Bible. So it's not a Christian phenomenon.
Okay.
Which I think people need to know. And then they look at who the flat earthers are. The leading video producer is Eric Dubé. I think he's been banned from YouTube for hate speech because he's a rabid anti-Semite. He's a Holocaust denier. Or Hitler was totally misunderstood, he says. This is the flat earth leader, okay? A new age yoga instructor living in Thailand, not a Christian of any sort, okay? So why would we want to follow those guys instead of following the great teachers throughout church history who believed in a global earth?
Yeah, I agree with you. I believe it's a massive distraction. Many people have kind of bought this idea, and it's interesting. No matter how much people like yourself or I will, put out evidence that the Bible in the language isn't saying that, it seems like it just doesn't make a difference. Is there kind of a simple experiment that you could suggest that somebody could do with their own eyes, with no special equipment, and actually see that it's a pass or fail kind of test? Is there something that I suggest people just go to the beach and you can see the sunset twice if you want. If you sit down and watch it and then stand right up, you can see the sun go down again. That would be evidence of a spherical Earth. Is that right?
Does it actually work? Does it? You can actually do it quickly enough.
You can. I mean, you can't see the whole thing again, but you can see, as the little sliver goes down, you quickly stand up and you can see that little sliver for just a few more seconds.
Certainly, Don Takarboska had this idea where you're on a boat and you go as far as you can see the shoreline, then you climb up to the mast, and then you can see further on. You see a signal that you couldn't see on the bottom, and yet, of course, the distance from the top of the mast should be a little bit greater, if anything, and yet you clearly see something you couldn't see on the bottom, because of the bulge of the Earth was hiding it. You see, why do you think they had the lookouts right as far as they could go? Because you could see further along the curve. You see, I mean, these are things that, even the idea, what do you think the sun is doing? You think it's going overhead, or do you think it's going down below the flat disk? You see, and yet what do we see? We see the sun. No change in size. We know there are different time zones around the world, as you can easily call someone in a different time zone. You'll see what I'm talking about. Call someone in the opposite hemisphere and ask what constellations they see, what phase of the moon they see. Call someone you trust, okay? Someone, no reason to lie to you. I can call my parents, no reason to lie to me, okay?
Right. I don't think they're trying to keep a global conspiracy. They're pulling the global wool over your eyes, as it were. So
with more deception when I saw the window and it was full daytime. They're clearly trying to deceive me, weren't they? Yeah. And of course, when I call them, I make sure I'm not calling them at 3 a.m. Because of the time change. You see, so these things we all know about. You see, these are obvious things we all know about. It doesn't require NASA to prove it.
Yeah. Well, you've given us some excellent proofs just from the history of the church in the Middle Ages and before, and of course after. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe even Augustine believed that the Earth was spherical.
Oh, yes. He believed the Earth was a sphere. Now, the thing is, he's been misinterpreted because he was doubting the Antipodeans. Antipodeans are people who live on the opposite side of the Earth as you. Now, in those days, they believed that the equator was too hot to pass. Okay, so if you got people on the other side, how could they come from Adam and Eve? That was the issue, you see. So could such people exist? But now, of course, we know that the equator is not really that impassable. But the question was always on, could people exist on the other side of the globe? Not any dispute about whether the Earth was a globe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's been misunderstood, misrepresented quite badly, yes.
Okay. Fascinating. Tell us some more about your book. I mean, we only have a few minutes left here, and obviously you wrote 800 pages, so we can't get into it too much. But kind of give us
is the site. Just a minute.
okay. That's 800 pages is a lot of stuff, and
Can you
so
see this?
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is Genesis.
Yep.
Fantastic tome that you've written on that. Where can people get this, by the way?
Okay, go to creation.com, the books, or creation.com/Genesis. That's our Q&A page relating to Genesis and its interpretation. And one of the books that come up on that page is the Genesis account. And it talks about dinosaurs, it talks about radioactive dating, talks about distant starlight. It talks about the Adam and Eve and how we know we've descended from them.
Mm-hmm.
These are origin of races, origin of language. Yeah, where did Cain get his wife? So all the things that people want to know about Genesis, hopefully they want to know about it. Why do people live so long back in Genesis? Why don't we live so long nowadays?
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully it answers some questions, goes into the Hebrew text. And as I say, it explains if Jesus is if a passage is quoted in the New Testament, I'll try and make that link.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's such an amazing 11 chapters. I mean, it's only 11 chapters, not that many words, and yet there's so much packed in there that, you know, now obviously you've heard the argument, well, this is not a science book, so we shouldn't try to find science in the Bible. And okay, fair enough. It isn't a science textbook. We get that. It's not going to teach you how to be a heart surgeon, but
well, you know what I always say? Well, thank goodness it's not a textbook, because textbooks always go out of date.
good point.
But it's actually a history book more than a science book. So I'm actually claiming it's a book of history. What Genesis says happened actually happened in real history.
Mm-hmm.
In the Bible, there's Christianity is unique faith because it's talking about things that actually occurred in history. The God incarnated in real space-time history. He rose from the dead in real history. It's not myth or allegory. And Genesis is also written as real history.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible writers always take it as real history. There's no doubt in the mind of the Apostle Paul that Genesis was intending to write history.
So Adam and Eve were real historical people. The idea that there was a pre-Adamic race, that the fall of Satan happened before, you know, Adam and all that stuff. Okay. What do you do with that kind of stuff?
Well, okay, first of all, Paul says Adam is the first man. You can't get clear on that. Adam is the first man, not one of a whole lot of humans evolved from ape-like creatures. He's called the first man. And then he got the thing about death before sin. And the thing is, when God finished creating, everything was very good. Tov meod, very good. Okay, but if Satan had fallen in a gap between Genesis 1 and 1 and 1 2, then it's not very good. Satan's already fallen. The thing is, therefore, Satan must have fallen sometime after creation week and not during creation week. So that idea doesn't fly.
Yeah, it really doesn't. You can't say everything is really good, tov meod. If you got death, you got this rebellion, you've got a third of the angels have already gone into rebellion against God, and God's like, oh, it's all good. It's all good. I mean, it seems very incongruent with God's very robust statement, tov meod, right? So,
and that's the seventh time he says good, and 7 is a number of perfection, as we all know. So, and the 7th time is tov meod. So I think God's trying to tell us something. There was no imperfection or disharmony in the finished creation, including there's no satanic flood that caused all the fossils and the dinosaurs to die out. No, that's not there. It's all, everything's living in harmony. Animals aren't even eating each other. They're eating plants. Okay, so the millions of years, no matter which millions of years view you have, whether it's gap theory or day age or theistic evolution or framework, they all put this disharmony before sin.
mm-hmm.
Problem there also is, I mean, what about restoration? Aren't we promised a restoration? Mm-hmm. Restoration to what? Means going back to what we had. So restoration means going back to millions of years of death and suffering.
Do you think some of the golden ages that we find in other cultures may be a kind of a flashback to the time before the fall?
I think it may be possible because all cultures descended from Adam and Eve via Noah and their sons. So I'm not surprising if they all carried remembrances of this perfect time before sin came in. It's interesting how many cultures around the world have a global flood legend.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the missing link in a lot of cosmology / geology, is that the global flood is going to explain how you get all of these fossils. It's going to explain rock formations. It's going to, and of course, just all the different layering and all these things. I have had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Steve Austin.
Oh, he's one of the best geologists around. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, I remember him talking about he was doing some geological modeling in his bathtub one time.
Oh, wow.
And as he was just kind of sitting there pondering, and there were bubbles and whatnot, and he started thinking about Spirit Lake, there and I've had the privilege of going to see Spirit Lake myself.
Oh,
Pretty
okay. I
cool.
haven't done that yet.
Yep, and you see the stratification in the mini Grand Canyon, which I guess is 1/40th the size of the Grand Canyon.
Yep.
And it happened. I mean, we have it on record how quickly it happened. We know what caused it, and it didn't take millions and billions of years for this thing to happen, right? So it all happened right there.
Well, that's the sort of thing. I think the flood is such an important part of world history, and when you understand the flood, I think you don't need the millions of years, because in science, you can always trade intensity for time. So you have something very intense like a global flood. You no longer need millions of years to do all the work of geology, of building the layers and the erosion and the fossils. The flood, being so intense, did that in a very short time.
So kind of like you can take a lump of coal, and according to the standard evolutionary model, it takes millions of years for that to turn into a diamond. But if you put it under sufficient pressure and heat, it will also turn into a diamond. Is that right?
Well, it's an interesting thing about that. Except diamonds are an interesting thing, showing it had to have happened quickly, because see, diamonds actually metastable compared to graphite at room temperature. You see, so if you didn't erupt the diamond bearing rock extremely quickly, supersonically, it would anneal back to graphite. So the formation of diamond not only shows a very strong heat and pressure, but also a rapid eruption, quenching it in the diamond crystal structure before it had a chance to anneal to the more stable graphite structure.
Fascinating. So again, what do we do with these scientists that are getting these very old ages for the Earth? They kind of look at us funny, like, well, what's wrong with you guys? You think the Earth is young, and yet we have all scientists, as we hear, all scientists think that the Earth is old.
Really? I mean, they weren't there at the time, so they're using processes that have changed over time, making certain assumptions about the initial conditions, the rates having been constant, and then nothing else has interfered with the system they're measuring. But in fact, you can actually play them at their own game. Carbon dating. Let's assume carbon dating is a very accurate, perfect dating method. If that's true, you shouldn't find carbon in anything over about 100,000 years old. It's all have decayed. We know the rate of carbon-14 decay, and yet we find diamonds, which are about as closed a system as you could have. When diamond is the hardest substance on Earth, okay, apart from the human heart, anyway. Okay, so if you've got a carbon-14 in the diamond, it was there when it formed. The diamonds are alleged to be 1 billion years old or more, and yet the diamonds are proved to have carbon-14 in them, which means they haven't existed long enough for carbon-14 to have decayed. So when you look at, here's a great example of how the diamonds can't be billions of years old, therefore the rocks they're in can't be billions of years old. And then the exciting information about finding things like in dinosaur bones, blood cells, blood vessels, proteins, animal proteins, they are, even DNA signals have been found in dinosaur bone. I mean, several tests, chemical tests, and have shown that DNA from a dinosaur exists in the dinosaur bone. And again, we can measure the rate of DNA decay. 2015 Nobel Prize was awarded for discovering that DNA was very unstable. Yes, so we know that. And yet DNA is in dinosaur bones, and yet you can measure the rate of decay of something that's frozen solid, and yet the dinosaurs are far older than that maximum survival time of DNA under the most favorable conditions. You just can't get it as old as 65 million years old.
Right, and of course there was the paleontologist who discovered, as you're alluding to here, discovered the DNA soft tissue in the dinosaur bone.
Yes.
I mean, that you know, and she's like, well, I guess it just proves that this is, you know, like, how did it last for 65 million years, right?
And yet the
I
object
thought was like, it didn't last that
exactly.
long.
That's the thing. They're committed to what they can't see, the millions of years, instead of actually being committed to the science they do see, which is we're seeing these things, and we also measure the decay rate. So that's what we should be thinking. This is the real science. And millions of years is not real science.
Uh-huh.
And the thing is, what she claims preserves these things, in fact, would actually destroy the things they're trying to preserve. I mean, you may have heard of her thinking of things like iron solution might help to preserve things, but the reaction they use is called the Fenton reaction, and that's often used to destroy organic tissue, you see. And some of the things the Fenton reaction would destroy are things that are found in the dinosaur bone.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, you can't say the Fenton reaction preserved things. It would have also destroyed things. You can't decide that once you've got a reaction, it's going to do what a reaction does. It can't just sort of pick and choose the things it's going to do. It does what it does. And that's so clearly the Fenton reaction has not happened. Otherwise, other things would have been destroyed in the process.
Well said. Well said. Well, we've kind of come to the end of our time here. It went so fast.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us, sharing your research,
That's been fun. Thank you.
800 pages of what you've done there. Genesis 1 to 11 is one of my favorite areas of the Bible. I just think it's so interesting. And so I bet you had a lot of fun writing that book.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me on to talk to about. I'd like to discuss my book. Yeah. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So people can get that at creation.com. Just give us a really quick snapshot of what is the purpose of creation.com.
Okay, the ministry is Creation Ministries International, and it has about 7 countries around the English-speaking world. And we've been going for 40 years by different names. Okay, we produce Creation Magazine. That's again coming up to its 40th anniversary. Creation Magazine. We have a more technical journal. It's been going for over 30 years now. And our website has over 12,000 articles on it. So there's an enormous amount of information that anyone can look for. Got a great search engine. You can type things you want to type in, and it's updated every day with something new. In fact, you type Refuting Flat Earth into Google, and our article comes up about #1.
Uh-huh.
So it actually made the secular search engines.
Congratulations. I suppose it's kind of a weird, you know, you never want to be too famous for flat Earth, but well, and I just want to encourage the flat earthers that are watching right now. You know, there's just been some comments that, well, we should just listen to the Holy Spirit, or we just need to read the Word. And you know, with all due respect, you know, Dr. Sarfati has definitely spent some quality time in the Word. He has spent a lot of time with the languages. I have as well. So it's not that we're just sticking our heads in the sand. We've actually done a lot of research, and we just don't believe that it's flat for many, many, many reasons, as we've discussed here on this show. So they can go and check out the article on creation.com. Say the name of it again for the flat Earth people that are interested.
Well, if they just Google Refuting Flat Earth or Flat Earth Refutation, things like that, you'll come up with their article. I think it was #1 last time I checked.
Okay.
And there are also articles linked to it, like the Flat Earth myth, which is about how the church has universally taught a global Earth. You know, so that's something people need to realize.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, for those people that are seeking truth, you've got to really go and take a good look at that research, because, you know, some people who are putting out YouTube videos and websites and stuff in favor of the flat Earth, maybe they haven't done sufficient amount of homework. So.
Oh, it's horrible stuff.
But you know, the good news is that God is faithful. God is so patient with us. He's kind, and what I just love about the Bible is that we can trust it. And you've spent 800 pages just helping us understand, you know, some of these phrases, the words, idioms, and whatnot, and you know, just giving a good explanation of some things. And sometimes it just takes somebody who has a reasonable answer, say, well, have you considered this, that, and the other? And that's what you've done. So again, we want to thank you, Dr. Sarfati.
Thank you again. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So people check out his book, check out the articles on creation.com. And again, thank you for taking your time out of your busy life to share with us some great science and some great Bible. So Until next time, everyone, as you know, stay in the Word. That is the key to it all. Staying in the Bible is how we grow. God's Word is faithful. We can trust it, and even creation, we can trust it all. It's all good. That's the really great thing. So until next time, God bless.